Okay, cool. So we'll go through this. It seems like a lot of you are in kind of like so also my research is in haptics and soft robotics. So some of my work uses some methods from psychology and neuroscience and also robotics. So all of you mentioned like some of those fields. And then I also had some experience in like some molecular and microbiology. I did like some cancer research at UH Cancer Center, and then also some work with Rosie and Kiana doing microbes at AEA. Um, Today I might go over, if we go over, you can drop out. It's recorded. I'll post it on the honuascholars.org/graduate-school. Um, But anyways, so today we'll do an overview of what graduate school is for some who might be less familiar, an overview of the NSF GRFP. We'll talk about the judging process for it, and then NSF has two main components, so I'll quickly go over all of those and my tips to writing it. And then there's some slides for how to ask for rec letters, which if there's time, I'll talk about it. If not, it'll be there. So this is Honua Scholars. We used to have a separate session for just what is grad school along with the panel. That's recorded on our YouTube page. So I just pulled out some slides from some of those old presentations. But essentially, graduate school is education beyond your bachelor's degree. And once you start getting past bachelor's, the percent of people who pursue this type of higher education like starts to dwindle significantly. So there's like master's degrees, which are more often course-based, and then a doctorate degree, which is like implied that you have some sort of research component and a thesis. And kind of like some job areas that would open through graduate degrees are things like being a professor, where you can train other students, doing research in different things you want to do. I'll also say that getting a PhD helps if you want to start like a nonprofit or a company, because with that PhD, you can be more competitive for grant writing, or getting investors for a certain thing. So in addition to like pursuing further into academia, like there's people who go into like investment banking and VCs with their PhD and their knowledge. Some other benefits are the opportunities to travel, go to conferences, work on teams. And then a quick overview of application season, which is starting now. So those of you who are still in that college, the senior range, this August, September, it'll be mainly like starting to ask for recommendation letters, taking the GRE if it's required. One of my personal tips for the GRE is that a lot of programs, it's more of a formality at some of the programs. And I struggled personally with my reading and writing during my SAT. And one of the things that I learned was very helpful was just learning the vocabulary in the GRE. And if you just Google 100 most common GRE vocabulary words, like, and memorize that like the week before, like profligate was one of them. And I remember like those 100 most common words will show up on your exam. Like I think 80 out of the 100 showed up for me. And I was able to like get a much better reading score than what I expected. So that's my one tip for GRE. Other than that, it's kind of a formality. Look at graduate programs, make a matrix. So you can make a matrix of like the school, the deadline, and then also professors who you would want to work with at those schools. And what I do is I make a big spreadsheet, and then through it, you can like check off, make sure you're not missing any deadlines, etc. Another tip is that if there are conferences, particularly like diversity conferences or recruiters visiting the schools, similar to undergraduate, graduate programs also often have fee waivers. So a conference I attend every year is ACES National Conference, which I'll also be attending this November. If you guys are attending, come and say hi. But pretty much a lot of the people there who represent a grad school will have a short email form and it's like fill this out to get a fee waiver. I think I calculated it. I think I saved like $1,600 by getting all the fee waivers and like random things. Um, and another important thing, which is like this month, next month, is applying for NSF GRFP. So I think that is due. That's a good question when it's due. And that's probably something I should know. But in the email that I sent to you guys, I did say to read over the solicitation, so you guys should know the deadline. October, November is like starting to submit things, and then January, you're waiting for grad school responses. Um, Unlike undergrads, grad schools will often fly you to the school to do a site visit, which is kind of like fun and cool. And perfect, October 17th. So there is time. Thank you for doing the homework. Um, and then this slide says graduate fellowship. So fellowships, you might be familiar, like for undergrad, they had scholarships. Graduate school, oftentimes they'll call it a fellowship. And honestly, I don't know. I think the difference is often fellowships also provide like tuition in addition to a stipend. So rule number one is if you go to grad school for a PhD, you should not be paying for your PhD. So like I know there's like certain cases at University of Hawaii where I've heard of PhD students paying their tuition because like the school department or the lab doesn't have funding. But um my recommendation is like if that happens, like try apply other places or see if other programs are open because usually you can get to a spot where you are not paying for your PhD. Um, and then the fellowship is kind of a bonus. So oftentimes what happens is a professor will get a grant, and this grant is given from a government and the government or a foundation, and they're like, do this research. So if you are on kind of this grant funding from a professor, you're kind of often stuck doing that research they defined. But the pro of getting a fellowship is that you could work on your advisor's kind of main line of research, but also if you're interested in something else, maybe something interdisciplinary, like this is where the fellowship comes in because it funds you as a person. Um, these fellowships are usually based on your academic merit and research potential. And again, it gives you kind of that freedom in selecting your advisor and project. When I was applying for grad school, one thing that someone said to me is that NSF GRFP is like the golden ticket. So you know, Charlie and Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, whichever variation you like better. It's kind of like the golden ticket to grad school. If you are applying to grad school and you end up with NSF GRFP, it helps to get kind of your top pick for what research lab you want to do, maybe the field of work you want to do, and like the school you want to go to. So especially for like the seniors in college, it's like no brainer, like apply to this because like it can only help. Cool. Now we'll get into the actual NSF GRFP. I gave the quickest overview of grad school because that's usually its own thing, and the NSF part is its own like hour-long session. So you guys have probably read the solicitation. NSF background on National Science Foundation, it funds kind of a large proportion of federally supported research. Their goal is to advance progress of science. A lot of NSF's funding is just earmarked by Congress. So like a lot of grants that come out, fundings, they're all kind of dependent on congressional funding. Also, this GRFP in particular, GRFP stands for Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And the fellowship provides 3 years of support, your stipend, and kind of a tuition allowance. So kind of like if you're at a school that their minimum payment is already higher than 37,000, often your advisor will supplement it with a grant or the school will supplement it. And then if you're at a school where the stipend might only be 22,000, um, which I think UH might be around 20 to 22,000 still, then kind of getting this fellowship means that you might get a bonus. So you'll get paid more than what you would have gotten. So that's also a perk. Um, I won't read over this, but kind of the goals are to support people early in their career and broaden participation of underrepresented groups, including women, minorities, persons with disabilities, veterans. And they try to find people who would have strong intellectual merit and broader impact. There's a bunch of eligibility criteria based on like what everyone's talked about. I think you guys are all eligible. Kind of the big thing is a US citizen, and then you can only apply twice in your lifetime, once as an undergraduate and once as a grad student. So my kind of like general recommendation is always apply as an undergraduate because it's your free shot at the fellowship. Um, and then if you don't get it, then apply in your second year of graduate school because that way, during your first year, you can try to get a publication or get more research experience so that your second time you can use the comments from the first time and your additional experience to put forward your best application. Um, there's some like more intricate things like so some of you might have been like, oh, like not sure if I want to go to graduate school, but you might apply to GRFP. So like for those cases, if you get offered GRFP, you might have to decline it if you are not going to be enrolled. However, if that happens, you should reach out to NSF to see if you can defer it. Usually rules for deferral are that you already have to be accepted to a school, then you can defer it. But in the case I was looking it up, like there's some cases where like you might not have been accepted into an institution, in which case you might decline the fellowship and do other things. But if that happens, like try contact NSF and try contact your dream graduate school and be like, hey, I already have funding. Could I like do my PhD here? And I think that they might be more than open to doing that. So the NSF GRFP consists of two main components, although there's 5 things listed. So research statement, personal statement, which is 3 pages, a research statement, which is 2 pages, your academic transcripts, reference letters, and then they have like a list of education, work experience, publications, presentations. I don't think there's an actual CV upload, but you're kind of like transcribing everything from your CV into those blanks. Um, One of the things that people can sometimes slip up on is that because there's no CV upload, oftentimes they'll fill out the blanks and miss out on kind of important things. So that's why my recommendation is when you're filling this out, have your completed CV next to you so you can copy paste it in and like make sure that everything on your CV is kind of represented. So like something like significant honors, like maybe there's other things on your CV that didn't fit into the category, but you can just kind of say, oh, it's an honor or something. Um, General tips, there's some formatting things which I won't talk about because I think you can read. One of the key things is that kind of bolded in the middle, it says that you have to have specific statements on intellectual merit and broader impact in your application. So you'll see this with different NSF examples, but It's not like your college application essay or your grad school application essay. In these NSF kind of proposals, you'll have explicit sections that say intellectual merit and broader impact. And you have to have it explicitly said. Well, I guess you don't have to, but you not like definitely should. Um, and some things to think about are trying to figure out how you can develop a cohesive story about who you are and how it will blend with your two statements and also your recommendation letters. It should demonstrate kind of your future impact as a scientific leader and demonstrate that you will kind of have an impact on your field and broader society. And then also show that you're excited about research. So like show that it's like, oh, I'm not just doing this research because it was the only thing there, but say like, oh, I actively chose it because X, Y, and Z, or like I had this interest, so I did this research, blah, blah, blah. And like some of you might come from a background where like the prior research, or you might have no research or like an experience might be kind of the only thing you had. And like it's okay to still talk about it and say it and say it very actively, like because you still chose that over a million other things or not majoring in your degree, etc. So everything you had an active choice, you got to where you are today by your own merit and accomplishment. Um, there are hints and tips here. Um, Kind of like you did with college essays, give it around to people to review, friends. If you have other people in your lab group, also send it to them. Um, Things like that. If you know people who previously got it, have them read your application over. Um, I guess this is tips from reviewers. Um, Yeah, people who review the NSF, they're just like normal people who are flying on airplanes who would rather sleep, but they have to read 10 applications. So there's a few tips like bolding words, and we'll go over that soon. You guys can read back on this slide later. Um, you guys can also read back on this slide later. So kind of like this is kind of just like that cohesive story. And my tip is to, before you start writing, have your resume all the way from like experiences from middle school already. Um, you won't put your middle school experiences on the portal, but like it can help you frame different ideas of why you are in the field you are today. Uh, I guess there's like an application timeline. I'll skip this. Um, I might actually skip the applic. I'll go over this. Okay. So reviewers look at the two things in every NSF proposal will always be something called intellectual merit and broader impact. So intellectual merit is kind of like, are you contributing to the field? Are you contributing to knowledge in this area of study? And then broader impact is, how does your work contribute to broader society? How does it contribute to other tangential fields? How does it contribute to interdisciplinary work? For personal statements, your broader impact would be like, oh, how are you going to do outreach and community service to incorporate people who are from underserved backgrounds into your research or like into activities that you do to get them interested in science. Um, so the panels are based on kind of your research area. So your reviewers will know some of your work, but don't assume that they'll know everything. So for those of you who are in like molecular biology, we can probably assume they'll know what P53 is, what a plasmid is, and what DNA, RNA is. But if there's like a very specific niche protein that you're working on in like a very unique part of some organism, they might not know that. So when you write it up, either explain it and break it down or like find other ways to describe it. Um, so yeah, there's kind of like how will your proposal advance knowledge and benefit society? Reviewers ask kind of like, do the proposed research objectives actually answer your research questions? Does your plan does your plan have cohesion? So like if you're saying, oh, I'm interested in grad school, like I want to do work in robotics, and then like your research kind of proposal is in molecular science, it might be a little disconnected. But similarly, you want to align all of your statements and you want to make sure that that will align with your letters of recommendation. Um, it's interesting that, so here are just kind of some, this is what a review will look like when you get your NSF back. So like it'll explicitly have sections like, oh, like grading you on broader impacts and grading you on that intellectual merit. So like when we look at some of the strengths, it's like in the middle paragraph. I don't know how to do pointers. But yeah, kind of in the middle paragraph, it's like some strengths are like unique perspectives or like served as a peer mentor. Um, yeah. Okay, so now we're getting to the juicy part. It's like 30 minutes to go over like the logistics. Usually kind of that part is a whole hour in itself. So I know I talked very fast. But you guys have the slides, and then you can also email me for questions if you have them. Um, but hopefully we'll get through this. So the two parts that we'll go over today are the research proposal and the personal statement. This is also called the graduate research plan statement. And this is kind of like a two-page research statement that where you'll lay out a plan for your graduate research. Ideally, this plan will take about 3 to 4 years. So it's roughly the extent of your PhD-ish. Um, and it's kind of you showcase that you can do research, you can think critically about the scientific method and the process for that. And like a key thing is having the logic between your connections. So if you want to propose a project on um like finding a cure for cancer, you want to make sure the intro like nails in why curing cancer is important. Aim one like really gets to the meat at a step that can actually work towards that cure, etc. Um, my recommendation is don't do something that broad like curing cancer, like do something that's tangible in your 3 years. Unless you know how to cure cancer, but that's another thing. Let me know if you do. Um, so some tips working with the current lab. So if you did research in a lab and you did a whole experiment and got preliminary data or even published a paper, you can kind of think of that as your first aim or your first step. And remember when you were writing that paper probably had a future work section that you wrote yourself, or you might have talked to your advisor. Work that section into your aim two, and then aim three, like think what would be the future work for that section. And in engineering field, aim three is usually like an application. So aim one and two are like building up something, and aim three is like applying it to a scenario. Um, and some of the more other sciences, it might be like finding the genetic information for something, then like isolating it, and then like doing some other experiment. Sorry, I'm very distant in that field. Use citations in the methods and also in your intro. And another key thing to note is that you are not committed to doing the work. Sorry, it appears my Zoom is pooping out. We'll see how well this goes. Okay, here, slideshow. Yeah. Can I have a thumbs up in the chat just to make sure you can hear and see me because of the disconnection? Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, there's like thunder and lightning over here, so things might get a little sketchy. If not, I'll record the rest myself and then send it to you guys. Um, so so yeah, you're not committed to doing the work. So let's say you have like a really great idea and like a medium idea, but you know more about the methods and techniques for that medium level idea. It might be better for you to do that idea instead. um, just because like it'll write a better proposal, etc. So it's something to think about. Also, for those of you who are like borderline, like between fields, you can submit your proposal in a field that you have experience in, and then choose to do your PhD in another field. So when I was in undergrad, the first time I applied to NSF, I did work in kind of like a biological systems modeling lab. So my NSF proposal was written based on that. And then my PhD work was actually in haptics and soft robotics. So everything that I've proposed, I actually didn't do any of it because I switched groups. And that's expected because a lot of people are rotating in labs, applying to grad schools. So that is 100% okay. Okay, now we're getting into the actual uh, research proposal. So again, the title of this is a crash course. So this is one formulation of how to write it that I find is quick in making the draft, and it helps to do this, and then you can go back and revise. So the first thing is the title, general background and motivation. And I have like a page count thing, so 1/4 of the page count. So this should be at most half a page because you have a 2-page limit. Um, and you start with a more general background. So for this example, it talks about climate change in general, how like it's a really large crisis, how renewables and demand goes into climate change in general. And then we'll actually see that it goes into more specific background where I think oh yeah, cool. I color coded it. So there's general background about climate change. That purple box should probably go all the way to the end of citation 2 on the 5th line. And then we have like more specific background, so more specific to your work. So let's say that you are working on human-robot interaction. The introduction would be like, oh, robots can be useful in daily life, but robots are big and bulky, made of heavy and hard materials that can injure people. You'll talk about that a little bit, and then your specific background might be like, oh, like there's a field of robots called soft robots that use silicone or fabrics and pneumatics. And then finally, at the end of your introduction, you'll introduce your new idea. So kind of you want to identify a gap in the previous research and then you'll state kind of like, hey, like there's existing techniques. How can I make this field better? Or what can I do to innovate on it? So like for this example, I'm not in this climate change field, but it talks about like specific technologies that they can move forward on. And you're gonna say like why it's creative, and then also list or kind of mention your specific aims. So often people will just say like the first step in this is to do X, the second step is to do Y, the third is to do Z. So there's an example here. For the robotics example, I would be like, oh yeah, soft robots, specific background, and I would be like, hey, but um, soft robots are hard to control, and most of the sensors that we have are rigid. However, there's like this new method of using air channels to use differences in air pressure to use for sensing for these robots. So then I could like get more specific and I would be like, to develop this like air channel system for sensing, do XYZ.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So, for example, if, like, as you mentioned, if you want to write a proposal about the field that you're already currently doing research in, right? And for example, if you've written proposals and things like that already, and you've, started your own projects, to what extent are you maybe able to parallel this newer proposal for the application? Like, to what extent can you draw from what you've done if it hasn't been like published or things like that? Like, do you have any suggestions in terms of that?
You can very, very strongly draw from it. And yeah, I know I'm saying that on the record. So, what some people do is like, the PI might have worked on a proposal. So this PI might talk to a student and be like, oh, like these are kind of like how I laid it out and what I want to do next. So I know that does happen. Oftentimes, if you wrote another proposal yourself, um, usually those proposals are probably longer, but you could like kind of condense it and make it concise, make sure it has a section for broader impact and intellectual merit, and potentially submit something fairly similar.
Okay,
Uh,
so even if the
yeah.
project is currently being done or worked on and it's not completed, you could still essentially inspire yourself from that when writing this. Okay.
Yes. For my own NSF, I had to apply twice. I didn't get it when I was in undergrad. But the second time, kind of work, the work in AIM one, like one third of the work was kind of already done, and I knew the result already, but I wrote it up saying that I had preliminary data and I would slightly improve it, if that makes sense.
And so but that was as like when you were a graduate student. Like if you're an undergrad going into it, you wouldn't recommend saying, "Oh, I have like preliminary data on this," basically. You'd just be like, "Oh, this is a project idea that I have in mind."
Um, Yeah. Do you know if that might be published soon?
No, it wouldn't be published like anytime soon.
Okay. Oh, there are ways to like reference preliminary data. Like, I know some people, the first NSF I did, it was like at the same time I was submitting a conference abstract. So what it was like Yoshida et al. Name of things submitted. So then you could be like, oh, like in aim one, I want to do this, and like I would like to build off some of my prior work, and you can like kind of show the data or something and cite yourself. That has
That makes
happened
sense. Okay,
before.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's the intro. This is the body. So the body would be about half of the total length of your proposal. Usually there's 2 to 3 aims, and what an aim is it's like one step in achieving your overall proposal mission. Um, I really wish I replaced this with something I understood, but if you're environmental science, hope you understand it and it helps you. So in the body, you'll go through 2 or 3 aims, and these will be like 3 paragraphs. The way that I write these for my first time is write a topic sentence that explains the aim and why it's important and what it accomplishes. So when we look at this one, it just states explicitly, I will create a multidisciplinary model of WC dynamics and performance. You might want to add something like, oh, this is a critical step because it will allow me to do X, Y, and Z. The next thing is going to be your approach. So in each of these aims, there should be, if you're doing a design thing like in engineering, like designing an actuator, you'll be like, oh, I'll create X, Y, Z. If you're doing a molecular thing, it might be an experiment number 1. And then a key thing to add in, which is not people often forget, is adding contingency plans. So for mine, I wrote about building new soft actuators, and I said, oh, I'll use like different patterns of materials on a soft actuator to dictate how it expands. And I made sure to write like, oh, like other materials or methods could be tested, such as using shape memory alloys, like other polymers, like other elastomers, like things like that. So um, what they often want to see is like you thought of a contingency that will help you still achieve your objective if something goes wrong. The last thing is to put your kind of analysis plan and expected results. So it's like, how will you know when your objective is complete? So um, if you look in this red box, it says objective 1 is attained when X, Y, and Z. So if you're doing a robot design thing, it'll say objective 1 is obtained when I have a soft actuator that can bend, twist, expand, and elongate by 10%, 8 degrees, you know. People in psychology might be like, oh, objective 1 is completed when I've created a new kind of teaching method that goes into elucidating how people enhance kind of cultural knowledge while they're performing a certain activity. So this body, there's 2 to 3 aims. So you'll do 2 to 3 objectives. And then the last part is kind of the conclusion section where you go over your intellectual merit and broader impacts. So again, to the right is an example where I pulled out from this NSF GRFP, and they have explicit sections that say intellectual merit and broader impacts. So the intellectual merit will have your kind of overall goals of your project and how it contributes to your field. So in robotics, you might say like building new types of actuators will allow us as a field in robotics to create new autonomous robots that are safe to interact with humans. Um, and another thing, when you guys are going through this, pull up these slides and these bullets, use them as check boxes. Like, do I have a sentence that addresses this? Because I am skimming through it a little bit, because there's a lot of content. But use it as a checkbox and use this to get your first draft. An interesting point is describing the school slash PI slash fit and expertise. So when you do these proposals, you'll want to name a specific lab and school and how those resources will help you achieve your project. So you might not know what grad school you end up in. So oftentimes as an undergraduate, you would write it based on the lab you're currently in. So when I was doing this, I said, oh, my lab at XYZ has this equipment, this materials, and the school has like this facility that will allow me to do my work. Of course, if you're doing like computational stuff that just uses a computer, you can say like, oh, school has a supercomputer. If you're at UH, especially in the biology fields, you could say like University of Hawaii is the perfect place because of Seymour, SOAST, HIMB, like it doesn't get any better. Name resources. People in psychology, if you're at UH, you could be like, oh, we have a very unique population, which is why my research is very unique and important to do here. Broader impacts for the research statement. You'll talk about broader impacts in the context of the actual research work itself. So in here, you won't really talk about like what you do for community service and stuff. It'll be more like what broader impacts come from this research. So for example, my work in haptics, it's often used also in education. So in this broader impacts, I would say, oh, I would use different robots and devices that I make in here and use it for educational purposes to inform the general public about robots. In your personal statement, your broader impacts will be more like personally, like I want to engage people in STEM. I'll go to diversity and STEM conferences, tutor and mentor people, or volunteer at like outreach days for general science. And then you will have references. Note that the references can be of a smaller size. Um, wow. So I see we have 9 minutes left. I will definitely go over. Here, can you give me a thumbs up if you are okay with going over? If you would be able to stay like 20 minutes additional, can you give me a thumbs up? And then based on how many thumbs up, we'll do the activity or not. Okay, cool. Maybe we'll skip it. Um, but in the slide deck, there are example aims. So environmental science and molecular biology, those aims I pulled from ChatGPT. I'll just be honest with you. In haptics, I pulled it from my personal NSF GRFP. So kind of it shows how you'll want to try to list your aims, but also see how each aim builds upon one another. So haptics, haptics is kind of like interfaces that interact with the sense of touch for those of you who aren't familiar. So kind of like your phone vibrates, that's haptic feedback. There's also like haptic robot gloves that you can feel objects in VR. So kind of my NSF was like aim one is building a new soft robotic actuator. And then my approach was using shape-changing fibers. I had a contingency and I had results. Aim two, it was use that actuator to build a haptic device and run user studies. And aim three was applying it to an actual task or experiment. So each of these aims build upon one another. However, like I had contingencies in place and it's like at each step, let's say step one didn't work. I said that there's a contingency to still build and design the haptic device, and I talked about that. So you want it to be connected, but not like fully reliant. We'll skip the activity. This is like a quick thing where it's like, as you grow up, well, you're already grown up, but as you get a little older and like start thinking of proposals, one activity I always do with people I meet is like, if we have a new idea, like immediately break it down into three different aims. So like, what three tasks would you do to achieve your project? But my fun one is like, let's say your project was a plant-based bacon substitute. Aim one would be like maybe like a literature search and doing experiments to find key ingredients that give it texture and taste, etc. Aim two might be creating the meat with three different options, and aim three might be a user study to see if they like it. Okay, personal statement. So the personal statement is about showcasing yourself. This is more of like the college essay. Um, and how I mainly write it is I get my CV resume and I put it into an essay, but I put explanations of why I did things. There's gonna be a tip like, oh, don't just write out your CV, but it's like write out your CV with explanations and a story, and then it'll be good. So again, I'll go over kind of the outline for this. For about 1/6 of your page count, explain who you are, how you got started into STEM. This is where you put the hook in or the fun story. So I read like an amazing NSF GRFP once where it was like, oh, I grew up in China when there was the SARS outbreak and like it was like very virulent. It affected a lot of people. People in my family were hospitalized or died, which made me go into STEM. Now, after I was in STEM, I found out that SARS was created by a virus. Therefore, sorry, I'm not sure if it's actually created by a virus. I don't have much knowledge, but it was created by a virus or something. And they said, therefore, I got into virology. And then like it goes on and on. So like try and figure out who you are, define yourself. I will say a lot of research in psychology, biology, and also engineering, like for those of you who are like native Hawaiian, like you can bring in your personal or cultural experiences. So I know that there's some people who are like, oh, I grew up working in the lo'i or having worked at He'ia. And, I always wondered, like, why are there so many jellyfish on the bottom of the fish pond? So then I got into like microbial science, etc. Um, Intellectual merit will be the majority of your personal statement. So intellectual merit, this is where you're kind of explaining. It says say it as a story, not as a resume. So it's like get your resume and all your educational and research experiences and write it into a cohesive narrative. So you could say like, oh, I started doing my work. I did volunteer work with this nonprofit. And as I was doing that, I did outreach and then I met a scientist who was really cool. So I started doing that science work. And then I took additional classes to prepare me to do research. And that's why I'm ready for graduate school. So that's kind of a quick gist. Talk about the skills and lessons you learned from each experience. So this is where it's like not as a resume, but as a story. So it's like, oh, when I did my community service, I learned that there's all of these hidden scientific microbial things going on. So I wanted to do the research and show how it made show that you're actually tied to your work and you're not just doing the work. Um, Yeah, one of the activities that I usually do in the workshop is the 5 whys. So one thing you can do to reflect on is ask yourself 5 times why you did what you did. So why are you in robotics? Oh, I'm in it because I saw that robots can help people. Why do you want to help people? Oh, I want to help people because I noticed that after a family member had a stroke, he couldn't reach for things. Oh, like why, like you can go on and on. Why did someone have a stroke? Maybe not that path, but you know what I mean. Um, and then the last kind of main section is the broader impacts. So this is your activities in STEM and engagement, recruitment. If you are a member of ACES, SACNAS, write that in. For those of you applying to this, say that, oh, you participate in Honua Scholars Programming. It's a STEM mentorship organization in Hawaii looking at how we can incorporate cultural-based values into how we practice science. So you want to come back and volunteer with us to do sessions, which you can, by the way. We do have our monthly dialogue series where you can give a short talk. So you can bring in stuff like that, leverage other places you volunteered, nonprofits, other kind of outreach that you did. And then outlook and future work, this will be like a 2 to 3 sentence thing at the end. You'll literally label it outlook and you'll explicitly say, this fellowship will allow me to do interdisciplinary research that connects my culture in understanding how we can create new agroforestry systems along with my scientific path by understanding the soil composition in this work. So what that does is it ties you to your work and you want to really sell. This is your last sales pitch to saying why you want why you need this fellowship. Oftentimes, some good sentences that people often say is, my work is inherently disciplinary. So this gives me, the fellowship allows me to easily collaborate with multiple departments on new projects. Um, yeah, those are some key phrases that people often use. Okay, cool. I'm shocked. It's 5:01. So I will say that the personal statement part, it varies a lot more than the research statement portion. So the research statement, definitely do the intro, list your 3 aims in the intro, and then go over each aim with all of the sections that I talked about, along with broader impact, intellectual merit. Um, the personal statement, it can vary. I've seen personal statements that are like 2 pages. I've seen them at 2.5, and I've seen them at 3. Um, this does vary. My recommendation is if you go to the honuascholars.org/graduate-school site, these slides are linked, but also linked are some of the uh there's like a Alex Yang kind of like reference library of a ton of NSF GRFPs across every field you can think of. And a lot of people uploaded their comments, their personal statement, research statement, and use those as your template to build off. So those of you in psychology, find one of the proposals there and see kind of what methods they used and what they did. Um, and then also, if you're interested in seeing my personal statement, like let's say you're in soft robots, haptics, or you're from Hawaii, which is actually all of you are one of the 3. Um, you can just email me and I'll send you my statement. I just ask that you don't share it outside of yourself without asking first. Yeah. I used to post it, but yeah, we'll just share it on individual. Um, I'll, cause it's like short time, if you have questions, start adding it to the chat. I'll stay on to answer other things. Recommendation letters are very important. Um, oh, okay, so before you leave, how this works is that I went over all of the dense, boring lecture type content today. And we meet again next week, Friday. And that meeting, like, if you only have an outline done, that's fine, and we can talk it over. But that meeting, it would be nice to have drafts of, this is a little extreme, but drafts of both your personal statement and research statement. If you can't get the personal statement done, that's fine, but try to do the research statement because that is a little more tricky and people, they're a little bit, I guess reviewers, everyone follows the same format and guide. So I want to make sure that you guys have that down. So at the very, if you are able to make it next week, try to come with an outline for your research statement at the very least. What I recommend coming with is a draft of your research statement. And it's okay for it to be completely messed up and trash, but just write something because getting the words down, this first approach is what will help you like really speed up and accelerate. Um, but next week, uh, we actually won't go over any slides, but it'll actually be like a round robin peer review. So depending on who comes, we'll exchange statements and edit it. We'll like figure out how to make Zoom rooms and email it or put it in a Google Doc. Yeah, yeah, we'll figure it out. And then I'll also be here to also like read through statements and provide comments. Um, right now, I'm providing comments specifically during that session. I don't think I'll be able to contribute time outside of that session. So whatever you want feedback on, try to get it at that time. Um, if like if you are interested in like getting more feedback from me, do email me. And then I can try carve out time individually, especially since there's only like 7 or 8 or 10 of you, like I would be able to find time. Um, but like I won't like schedule it in advance. Okay, that was a long logistic spiel. I hope it makes sense. Next week, come with at least your outline for the research statement. That's the worst case. In the best case, you'll have all your statements fully written, and like that might be a little difficult, but a reasonable like thing is like the outline, and if possible, and you're not busy with classes yet, then try to have the full draft already ready by next week. Um, yeah. And it's okay if you're not even using complete sentences, just try to get words on a paper so that we can peer review and try to get feedback. Okay, that is the last thing I have to say. It's also okay for you not to come back next week if you don't have things ready, but I'll be here, and if like you don't have things, definitely you can still come and we can just talk about like what you need, and I can help you make your outline and stuff. So yeah, it's time for you. I'm setting aside that. Okay, I'll go. So if you have to drop off, feel free to drop off. I'll talk through this recommendation letter email. Um, recommenders are very important. You can use the same recommender for multiple applications. So a lot of you are applying to your PhD program and also for NSF. So ask the same recommenders to do both. Um, ask them in advance, probably around now, and then in a few weeks when you have your drafts done, you can send that to them. Be sure you spell their name right in the email. I once spelled their name wrong, and that was the fastest rec letter that I saw submitted, and I also did not get that position. Um, some general tips. So, kind of like a mutual understanding is that people will often provide rec letters to any student who asks, but you could ask, like, will you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? And this will help to decipher, like, will I will I when they fill it out, will I look like I'm in the top 5% of their students, or will it be like, oh, he took my class and he did homework, like he's a good student? Or will it be like, he's an amazing student, he TA'd for me, I saw him helping other students in the class. So you want to try to think of professors who are able to and are willing to write that strong letter. When you send that original email, give them the timeline for the due dates, what fellowships, and also what graduate schools you're applying for. What I do is I attach all of my application materials in a Google Drive folder. So graduate school programs, deadlines, spreadsheets, my transcript, CV, everything they would ever need to write this letter. Um, One thing I also do is I write specific requests on things to emphasize. So, having written letters myself, like I've been asked like, "Oh, can you write a letter of rec for my job or something?" And I'm like, "Oh, I know you're great. I know you worked well with me on my team, our team, and like this project." But then it's like, I know you did so many other things. I also want to like mention that too to be in line and be like, oh yeah, you were at this leadership position, which is why you led the team that I worked on with you so well. So like it gives it a little bit more depth. Be responsive. Many rec letters will ask for additional information, um, maybe even talking to you one on one. So when I was applying for graduate school, one of my professors, she wouldn't write a letter unless you like spent 30 minutes pitching to her why you want to go to grad school, why it's important to you. So she kind of like vetted you and saw if you're serious or not. And she wrote a very strong letter. Um, this is one of the example emails. So it's like, always thank them for supporting them in a class or something, ask them to write the letter, say explicitly the deadline, either attach the drafts or send them a Google Drive folder. I'd be happy to call or Skype to talk more. So you might see that I think this was an email that I actually sent myself when I was applying to something and Skype was still a thing. And I guess oh, this is if you worked in someone's lab this past summer. Um, so I often also give this kind of NSF talk to people at who were like summer undergraduate researchers in college. So this is an email template you can use to send it to your PI if you're an undergraduate researcher, like currently or just finished this past summer. And then there's more resources, general tips, and I think we'll stop there. I think that's all I'll talk about on these slides. Did anyone have, that was very dense. Thank you for staying attentive this whole time. I hope that some of the like large dropping of information got into you guys. But when in doubt, go back to these slides and use it as your template for building, especially for the research statement, title and keywords, general background, specific background, objective. If you go through this, it'll help you a lot. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys. I'll stop the recording and then how do I stop?